Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Manon Bolliger, a retired and deregistered naturopathic physician with 30 plus years of experience. Here you will discover engaging and informative conversations between experienced healers, covering all aspects of healing, the personal journey, the journey of the practitioner, and the amazing possibilities for our own body and spirit.
So welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have a second visit with Dr. Romi Fung, and he's a naturopathic physician practicing in Richmond, BC, Canada, with a special focus in dementia and cognitive health. Dr. Romi works with patients living with cognitive decline and dementia by augmenting their brain's environment. He believes that there is more to dementia than just working primarily with the brain. Several metabolic and biochemical factors affecting our brain emerge from the body. So Dr. Romi takes a comprehensive approach in working with his patients, from screening for inflammation, insulin resistance, and imbalanced hormones, all of which contribute significantly to our brain health, to interventions including lifestyle coaching and clinical nutrition. Now, he has completed his undergraduate Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences from Simon Fraser University, followed by graduating from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine with a doctor in naturopathy. And while building his practice, Dr. Romi went on to complete a Master of Science in Aging and Health from Queen's University, and is now pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy in Aging and Health, also from Queen's University. If you can believe, on top of that, on top of his practice and his study, Dr. Romi is a professor teaching traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture to future naturopathic physicians, also a clinic supervisor at the Canadian College of Natural Medicine called Boucher over here, and also at Bowen College. And we're getting together because he has been invited to give a TED Talk that he has named Beyond the Brain in Dementia. So, Romi, welcome. I'm sure there's something I've missed in all of them, but
no, that was amazing. That was great, and that was quite the mouthful, I'm sure.
yes, I managed to get it out. No, anyway, I'm really thrilled, and I think, from everything I know about you, so I'm not going to pretend I don't know you, somewhat anyways, is that it's possible to prevent dementia. And I think that is something that you want to scream from the rooftops, so that people don't wait until they so-called get their diagnosis.
Mhm.
Almost like the end. You kind of want to get it before it's that it be part of your health gnosis, as I say. So
Absolutely.
health things. So why don't we talk a little bit about that, your findings, and maybe educate us a little bit on that preventative aspect. What do we look for? Who are candidates? And what's this whole body thing that you're talking about?
No, absolutely. And I really want to thank you again for having me. And, it's always a joy just to chat with you, Manon. We always get these jolly jokes out and
Yes.
all. But absolutely, when it comes to our brain health, just like with any other chronic illness, prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's no different when it comes to dementia. When it comes to the brain health, there's so many aspects about and elements about the brain that we don't really think so much about, because conventionally speaking, everything just happens to be at the head right here and do everything in here, right?
Mm.
That's where most of the medications, the first one is usually Aricept or donepezil. And that is a really good pharmaceutical to get the brain connections going. But you always want to consider the environment of the brain, just like how we consider the environment of the body. There's always this really good analogy where you have a sick goldfish in a fish bowl, and because the water's dirty, do you either medicate the fish or clean the fish bowl?
Right.
And that's trying to tell everyone else, because right now the evidence, at least in the written literature, it says that about a third of all dementias is preventable. But I believe that is underestimated. I believe at least 60, if not 90% of dementias can potentially be prevented through a lot of our nutritional means, dietary, as well as lifestyle. And these are things, the evidence is growing that you might hear things like, oh, let's take fish oil for the brain, or curcumin for the brain, or, and that was my graduate studies research right there for my master's degree, curcumin as an intervention for cognitive impairment. But even things like people are saying sleep and exercise and all that. Is that just a brain specific thing, or is that a body totality kind of thing? So I started looking beyond the brain and realized that there are many things that we're doing that is found in the body, that if we work with the body, that we mitigate the risk for developing that cognitive decline and progression of dementia.
Well,
So
give us like an example of that, so it's very concrete.
Absolutely. Before I give the example, there's just everything that's coming together now in the research is actually by what we call epigenetics, the above the gene or beyond the gene. And one of these genes has been found to correlate with the production of the beta amyloid plaque. So is it getting rid of the plaque? That's the question. That's always been the big money research right there. What happens if we get rid of plaque? Do we actually reverse dementia and Alzheimer's? Right now, after over 200 clinical studies and trials on these so-called medications, unfortunately, we're not seeing much positive benefits right there. We have to look beyond that, or looking into the root. Why is plaque being made? And there's one gene now that's isolated called bace-one, BACE-1. And by eliciting it, that we actually start making and producing more of the beta amyloid plaque. And there are many things, I'm going to give you one example right now, that induces this plaque. The number one I find is something called hypoxia, or lack of oxygen. Now, lack of oxygen can come from many, many different sources. We think about breathing as a result. Could it be that our ability to not breathe or belly breathe or deep breathing, our inability of that is affecting our brains potentially? Because now we're living in a society where we're mostly in sympathetic mode. Our breathing has become a lot more shallower, and that is reducing the oxygenation happening, especially and specifically in the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, made for concentration and focus, and even executive function, so planning ahead in your day and all that. So there's that, but the other thing to do with oxygen comes from iron. And iron is what we need to make hemoglobin in our blood. And if we don't have enough hemoglobin in our blood, our ability to carry oxygen throughout the body and thus throughout the brain is impacted. And I'm finding a lot of my patients that are quite low on the ferritin, which is the stored form of iron. They're coming in with very low ferritin, and there's been no intervention per se. I have patients coming in with ferritin as low as 8, 5, even less than 1 I've seen on the blood work.
Right. So what affects ferritin? I mean, if on a simple level, I know, at least I've always been told, take molasses or eat more meat, or, if you do that, you should be fine, right? But that's not always the case. So what competes with the ferritin?
Good point and good question right there. There's a number of factors. And the first thing is, how do we absorb the ferritin? Even if we eat meat, I find people that are not vegetarians or vegans that are still eating and consuming good amounts of animal protein, still low in iron. And that's because we need to convert that iron into an absorbable form first and foremost. And that comes in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
When in the stomach, we have something called hydrochloric acid or stomach acid. And we need that stomach acid to be in its optimal level to be able to break bonds and get nutrients coming in, but to be able to convert the iron into a more absorbable form for us to absorb. And the reason why we're getting a lot of GERD and acid reflux and all that is not coming from a point of high stomach acid, but rather low stomach acid. And that is reflective of our stressed lifestyle, the sympathetic mode. And by not having that, by not turning on that parasympathetic rest and digest, we're impeding our bodies to absorb or to create stomach acid to be able to then break down the foods, then to be able to absorb in our bodies. So that's one major factor right there. There's a couple more as well, but I feel like constantly putting ourselves in sympathetic.
Yeah. And what's also interesting with that, most of the conventional or pharmaceutical approach is kind of misleading, because most of the tablets you take actually further decrease the acidity of the stomach. So you're stuck with even less to digest, right? So and digestion is huge for many things. If you can't digest well, it affects everything. But what other impacts would a person that suspects they might have this issue, so oxygenation, the ability for iron to be absorbable, what other inflammation, because you mentioned curcumin, which you could have a inflamed brain. How would you have an inflamed brain? How would that happen?
Well, that's digestion again, right there.
Okay.
So when you do have your digestion that's impeded, this is what we call gut permeability or leaky gut.
Right.
What can potentially happen is that whatever you're digesting is not fully digested, is being absorbed in the body inappropriately or prematurely, and that's coming to the brain, and the brain has to protect itself. And what happens is the immune system is going to get more involved in protecting the brain and protecting the body. This is what we mean by getting up that inflammation. And that can make the brain become also known as leaky brain or connected with leaky gut. And when you do get that inflammation going on in the brain, whether that be from the leaky gut and or a combination of foods that can also promote inflammation, then there are many cells in the brain very sensitive to inflammation, one of them being glial cells. And that helps put the whole brain together. In fact, I believe 60% of the brain is consisting of glial cells. And these are cells that don't necessarily regenerate as well as the others. So there's this misconception that the brain can regenerate, which can in some means, but not all cells have that capability. The point about relearning certain things, especially when it comes to cognition, is that the brain has the ability to make new connections, which neurogenesis, with the existing cells that it has. So that's information right there.
Yeah, neuroplasticity, right? Like when it develops new pathways. But ideally, you want to make sure that you don't ruin the pathways that do exist. So what about, I know that when I went to naturopathic school, it was like, oh, it's aluminum, it's mercury. What about those types of toxins, or phosphoglycates, or what about all of that kind of stuff? How does that impact in your practice? I mean,
So, no, absolutely. When it comes to heavy metals like lead, mercury, aluminum, or aluminium, wherever you're coming from, the point here is, yeah, there was a number of social media posts and news articles regarding some of the heavy metals. And to my understanding, these heavy metals are very reactive.
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
They can cause a lot of something we call oxidative stress because they have a lot of unpaired electrons that can then potentially damage proteins and fats potentially, because fats are more prone to damage, and our brain is about 70% fat right there. So having more aluminum, mercury, iron from any exposures, whether that be dental amalgams or lead pipes and all that, there is a potential tendency to cause that kind of damage. Not necessarily saying that these heavy metals cause dementia. It's something quite different to that. But in kind of my research and my kind of understanding and perspectives on this, the brain is a body of fat and is prone to oxidative damage, just like how it is prone to inflammation. And we have to mitigate that exposure as much as possible. And for some people, it would mean having to slowly, because I know there's the traditional chelation, where you're ridding these heavy metals from the body, and for good reason. Some people do chelation gently, as they do if they go seek a biological dentist to remove dental amalgams that have mercury in them. They would want to be chelating before, during, and after the event to ensure that the body's not to just protect the body from any spikes of mercury per se. But chelation can be a double-edged sword. So we have to be very gentle with that.
Yeah, and is there anything else generally to help? Because I was thinking digestion is so key to, inflammation, to oxygenation. Now, elimination, what pathways need to be functioning really well for that?
Good point. And that's the lymphatic system, which we call our recycling kind of system.
Right.
It's our cleaning system. And this is the importance of sleep and exercise, because the lymphatics run alongside the heart and the blood vessels, because it doesn't have a pump. It doesn't have a heart. The lymphatic system's just a whole system of potentially tubes and vessels that run along the blood vessels, and they depend on the pressure coming from the heart. So exercise is going to be important in being able to elicit that movement of the lymphatic system to get waste to move. But the biggest component of the lymphatic pertaining to the brain is something called the glymphatic system, which is glial cell lymphatic. That's the lymphatic system of the brain. And there's a number of studies, imaging studies, that show that when you get into deep sleep, your lymphatic system in the brain opens up to about 4 times its size to be able to facilitate any removal of wastes that are accumulated throughout the day. And some of these wastes have been found to be beta amyloid plaque. So it's not that it is a death sentence when we create beta amyloid plaque. We have ways to go about with mitigating that. I think every healthy person makes beta amyloid plaque. Look at the centenarians who live beyond 100 in the blue zones. With post-mortem studies, they're still found to have some level of beta amyloid plaque, but never really had the cognitive decline symptoms.
Yeah, it's like the body's ability to manage it, but I was thinking too, when you were talking about the lymph, I mean, that may be also why in Bowen therapy we see, when we do the basic procedure, the starting one, what I call reboot, is it helps the whole lymphatic system. So if on top of that they sleep better and these brain lymphatics want to excrete, if your body's lymphatics are stagnant, it's not going to be able to excrete as well, right? So it's really important to have the whole body, and there's lots of other things too, like the brushing,
Dry brushing, yes.
Brushing, other ways to get the lymphatic moving. So hydration, yes. Here we are, both without a glass of wine, water, whatever. I'm glad there's no glass of wine right now. I probably need one today. But water would have been really good. Anyways, but okay, so how can you tell though that you're like that before it's not that it's too late, but at a time where these are signs, like early signs that, is it like not knowing where you put your key, or it's like, what are the signs, the most common signs that people can see?
Yeah. So, well, first off, prevention is going to be always key. So I have patients that come in saying they don't have signs and symptoms, but we do the array of testing. So there's a number of blood tests that tell us more about your inflammation, about your cardiovascular health, about your insulin. Insulin is such a big factor in this as well. But the first and early signs and symptoms that should not be ignored would be, forgetting your keys, your wallet more often than you usually would, forgetting names, forgetting faces. You're looking at someone who you work with and you constantly forget their name. That might be potentially problematic. We have to screen for a number of these things. If you find yourself lost in a familial location, whether that be a mall or a neighborhood, that's also important. It doesn't always necessarily have to be short-term memory loss. We always associate dementia first and foremost with short-term memory loss, but even things such as loss of focus and concentration can also be early signs and symptoms that something is going on in the brain that is burdened and something that needs to be addressed. These are signals coming from the body, and that it's telling us something is a little off. We need to address it, and we need to take in all the cues from there.
And then I guess people can add, if they're not sleeping well, that means they're not repairing, and digestion has signs and symptoms if they're not, most of the time anyway, that things are not being absorbed. I don't think you can always tell it's not being absorbed, but certainly if you have digestive symptoms on top of that, then you can put all of it together and go, time to look after my body and my brain.
Yep, absolutely. And I would have to say that it's kind of like going from, I like the analogy of a highway. And if you picture a highway from the body to the brain, and if you think about the body as one major city, let's say Vancouver, and then the brain is probably a smaller city. Let's talk about, I don't know, Richmond, or let's talk about up north, interior, Prince George. There we go. And what I like to picture is that these roads are stable because these represent the pathways, the vessels, both the cardiovascular, digestive, and even the lymphatics. And then you have all the cars, the trucks, and moving vehicles, bikes. They all have to carry something from one end to the other. And you need to have these cars to be fully functional because that's what they're carrying. Fuel, they're carrying, glucose, which is coming from our diet. If we're not digesting well, we're not able to carry the glucose to the brain. There's also another very common thing that could happen about glucose is that the glucose gets to the brain, but doesn't get into the brain, especially one certain part of the brain, because not all parts of the brain will utilize the glucose. But there's a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is has the heaviest, densest number of insulin receptors, meaning it uses up a lot of energy. And it's this hippocampus that is the start to our encoding of short-term memory. So I find as I screen my patients, even wanting just to prevent because they have a family history of dementia and Alzheimer's, that insulin resistance tends to be the most common thing, potentially. Oxygen is also needed to be screened, whether that be coming from lack of iron, lack of proper sleep apnea is also something that's very important too. And this can be easily seen in a blood test.
Yeah, so there's plenty to do, not just fear and worry.
Or just treat accordingly, saying, oh, you have something in the brain, we give you something for the brain.
Exactly.
I find it to be very common in potentially students and even practitioners. And if it's not the wrong thing per se, it's not looking at the body as a whole.
No. But I mean, that's been the paradigm that has sort of taken over for a while, but I think it's on its way out as far as what I've heard on the news. Not the news. But I think people are tired of that paradigm, because it doesn't really make sense, to go after a part as if fixing the part will fix the whole. It's like it's just a backwards way of thinking. If you think of fixing the whole, then there's a chance that all the parts can improve, and then with specialization and study, you can decide what else might be to be looked at. Is there anything our interviews, like, we're already out of time. I feel like we haven't started, but
Really?
well, you've been speaking, so maybe it's different, but is there anything else that we're missing on the subject that that wasn't mentioned?
No, I think we got some pretty good parts about our cognitive health being reflective of the body and screening for digestion, hormones, inflammation, cardiovascular health, and toxins. Those tend to be the first few things that I would look into. And besides that, screening it's kind of like the most important message is everyone's always told that at 50 you ought to start considering taking a mammograph or even an endoscopy or gastroscopy. So looking to make sure that you're being screened for colon cancer. Why can't we get that same kind of level of screening for your cognitive health, even if it just entails to be a simple blood test?
Blood test, exactly. Especially that, right? Because like you said, the plaques can be there and they're not the biggest factor. People work around it with general health, so yeah. Okay, well, I think where to find you, that's part, maybe you could share that. I know that you give talks on a continual basis, and that's how you're so well known and appreciated, because you're accessible to people through those talks, all these public talks, and they're free as far as I remember. And then also, when people want to book an appointment with you, where do they go?
So I'm situated in Richmond, British Columbia. I have a private practice at the 3 West Center along number 3 and Westminster. Patients can find me I guess, online. You can either Google my name, Dr. Romi Fung, and usually it's the first thing that comes up. But there's also my website, www.drromifungnd.com. I also on social media on Facebook and Instagram, where I do post a lot of my upcoming talks and events, and also online booking that it's accessible for everyone. I provide care both in person as well as virtual for those in BC at this time. And future talks coming up. I'm excited for the TEDx talk happening soon, where I talk more about beyond the brain in dementia. I do have a number of online virtual talks as well through various organizations and various companies. I do mostly talks in my community of Richmond, where you're more than welcome to join us through either the Richmond Public Library or the various community centers of Richmond.
All right, well, thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Manon.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Manon Bolliger. Continue your healing journey by visiting thehealerscafe.com and her website, and discover how to listen to your body and reboot for optimal health.